The telegram clutched in Natalie Morrison's frozen fingers had turned into a useless slip of ice-covered paper. But it no longer mattered because she could barely see 3 feet ahead through the swirling white tempest that had swallowed the Montana Territory whole. She had stepped off the train in Billings 2 days ago, full of hope and nervous anticipation about meeting Wesley Fletcher, the rancher who had responded to her advertisement in the Boston newspaper. The stagecoach driver had assured her they would reach Red River, a small settlement near the Yellowstone River, before nightfall. But the blizzard had struck with such sudden fury that the horses had panicked, the coach had overturned, and Natalie had found herself stumbling through knee-deep snow with no sense of direction, and no idea where the driver or other passengers had gone. Her burgundy traveling dress, so carefully chosen to make a good first impression, now hung heavy with ice. Her leather boots, which had seemed so practical in the Boston shop, leaked freezing water with every step. The carpet bag containing all her worldly possessions had been lost when she fell into a drift an hour ago, and she no longer had the strength to dig for it. 23 years of life in civilization had not prepared her for this brutal wilderness. Natalie pushed forward because stopping meant dying. She knew that much. Her older brother had told her stories about men who sat down in snowstorms and never got up again. Thomas would be furious if he knew what she had done, leaving Boston to marry a stranger in the Montana Territory. But Thomas had his own family to support after their parents died of influenza, and Natalie refused to be a burden. The wind shrieked like a living thing, tearing at her hood and numbing her face. Her eyelashes had frozen together twice already, and each time she had to stop and carefully melt the ice with her breath. The cold had moved beyond pain into a strange, drowsy warmth that she recognized as dangerous. Her thoughts kept drifting to her mother's kitchen, the smell of fresh bread, the comfortable chair by the fireplace where her father used to read his evening paper. She stumbled over something buried in the snow and fell hard, her hands plunging into the icy powder. For a long moment, she could not find the will to rise. It would be so easy to just rest here, just for a minute. The snow was actually quite soft, almost comfortable. Then she saw the fence post jutting from the drift beside her, and hope flared weakly in her chest. Fences meant property. Property meant people. She grabbed the post with both hands and hauled herself upright, using it as an anchor against the wind. Following the fence line might lead somewhere. Anywhere was better than dying alone in the open. Wesley Fletcher squinted against the horizontal snow, reading the tracks like words on a page despite the wind's efforts to erase them. He had found the overturned stage coach an hour ago, empty except for scattered luggage and one deceased driver who had frozen trying to walk back to Billings. The horses were long gone, but there had been fresh tracks leading away from the wreck, small boot prints that could only belong to a woman, heading in completely the wrong direction. He knew who it was. The telegram from Billings had arrived yesterday, informing him that Miss Natalie Morrison would arrive on the afternoon stage. He had been riding toward town when the blizzard struck, and his first thought had been relief that he was close enough to his line shack to take shelter. His second thought had been worry about the stage. Now that worry had transformed into grim determination. Wesley was 26 years old and had survived more Montana winters than he cared to count. His ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, but it was a lonely existence. After his parents died in a Sioux raid when he was 19, he had run the place alone, building it up through hard work and harder winters. Last spring, his neighbor had suggested placing an advertisement for a mail-order bride, and after months of correspondence with Natalie, Wesley had found himself looking forward to her arrival with an eagerness that surprised him. Now she was going to die unless he found her soon. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Duke, fought the wind with every step, but Wesley kept them moving along the fence line. The tracks were filling in fast, but they were there, a slight depression in the fresh snow that told him she was still going, still fighting. That stubbornness might save her life if he reached her in time. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that might have been a cry or might have been nothing. Wesley urged Duke forward, leaning low in the saddle to protect his face from the worst of the blast. His buffalo coat kept most of the cold at bay, but his fingers were numb inside his gloves, and he could no longer feel his toes in his boots. If he was this cold, the woman ahead of him must be dying by inches. He almost rode past her. She had collapsed against a fence post, her dark cloak blending into the shadows of the storm. Only Duke's sudden stop alerted him to her presence. Wesley dismounted so fast he nearly fell, his stiff legs barely holding him upright. "Miss Morrison, can you hear me?" The woman did not respond. Ice crusted her eyelashes and eyebrows, and her lips had turned blue. Wesley stripped off one glove and pressed his fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. There it was, weak and thready, but present. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that his knees almost buckled. "I have got you now," he said, though she could not hear him. "You are going to be all right." Getting her onto Duke required strength he had not known he still possessed. The woman was deadweight, her body limp and unresponsive. Wesley managed to heave himself into the saddle first, then dragged her up in front of him, settling her against his chest. He wrapped his coat around both of them as much as possible, sharing what little warmth he had. The line shack was only half a mile away, but it felt like 50 in the storm. Wesley kept talking to the unconscious woman, his words whipped away by the wind. He told her about the ranch, about the mountains in summer, about anything he could think of to keep himself focused on survival rather than the very real possibility that they might both die before reaching shelter. Duke knew the way home and pushed forward with his head lowered against the wind. The horse's instinct for survival was stronger than the storm, and finally, blessedly, the dark shape of the line shack emerged from the white chaos. Wesley half fell from the saddle, still holding Natalie. He kicked the door open and stumbled inside, grateful beyond words for the small shelter. It was barely more than a single room with a pot-belly stove, a bunk, and a few supplies, but it might as well have been a palace. He laid Natalie on the bunk and immediately turned to the stove. His hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to strike a match, but finally a small flame caught on the kindling he kept prepared. He fed it carefully, gradually adding larger pieces of wood until a proper fire crackled behind the iron door. Only then did he turn his full attention to the woman he had rescued. Natalie Morrison was beautiful, even half frozen. Dark hair spilled from beneath her ruined hood, framing a face with delicate features and high cheekbones. Her letters had been witty and intelligent, her handwriting elegant. She had told him about losing her parents, about her brother's growing family, about her desire for a new life in the West. But none of that had prepared Wesley for the fierce protectiveness that surged through him as he looked at her pale face. "Come on," he muttered, beginning the delicate process of removing her frozen clothes. "You did not come all this way to die in my line shack." He had to cut the laces on her boots. The leather had frozen so stiff. Her stockings came away in pieces. Her dress was a sodden mass that required careful work with his knife to remove without damaging the layers beneath. He tried to maintain her modesty as much as possible, covering her with blankets as he worked, but survival mattered more than propriety right now. When he had her down to her chemise and covered with every blanket he could find, Wesley began the slow process of warming her extremities. He had seen frostbite before and knew the danger of warming someone too quickly. He started with her feet, rubbing them gently between his hands, watching for any sign of color returning to the pale skin. An hour passed. 2. The storm howled outside, rattling the shack's walls, but the fire kept burning, gradually transforming the space from frigid to merely cold to something approaching comfortable. Wesley kept working, moving from her feet to her hands to her face, carefully massaging circulation back into her frozen body. He had settled beside her on the bunk, her head resting against his shoulder as he rubbed her hands between his, when her eyes suddenly opened. For a moment, she simply stared at him with confusion. Then awareness flooded her expression, followed immediately by alarm. She jerked away from him, the blankets clutched to her chest, her eyes wide. "Easy," Wesley said, holding up his hands. "You are safe. My name is Wesley Fletcher." "You were caught in the storm." Recognition flickered across her face. "Wesley Fletcher, the rancher from Red River? That would be me. I found you collapsed against my fence line. This is my line shack. The storm is too bad to travel, so we are stuck here until it passes." Natalie looked down at herself, registered her state of undress, and color flooded her pale cheeks. "My clothes, frozen solid. I had to cut some of them off. Your boots are ruined, I am afraid." He gestured to the pile of wet fabric drying near the stove. "I tried to be respectful." She was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she laughed. It was a weak sound, barely more than a breath, but it was genuine. "I came all this way to make a good first impression, and instead you have to rescue me from my own foolishness and cut off my clothes." "I am doing wonderfully so far." Wesley found himself smiling despite the grim circumstances. "You survived a blizzard and a stagecoach accident. That is impressive enough. The driver," her expression turned serious, "dead when I found him. I am sorry." "I do not know what happened to the other passengers." Natalie closed her eyes briefly. "There was a merchant and his wife. They ran one direction and I ran the other. I thought I was following the road, but the snow was so thick I could not see anything. You did the best you could. The important thing is that you are alive." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Wesley felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black in the firelight, and held a depth of intelligence and determination that matched the woman from the letters. "Thank you for saving my life," she said quietly. "I know we have not been formally introduced, but under the circumstances, I think we can skip some of the niceties. Thank you, Wesley." "You are welcome, Natalie." Her name felt right on his tongue, familiar despite this being the first time he had spoken it aloud. "How are you feeling? Any pain in your fingers or toes?" She wiggled her toes beneath the blankets, then flexed her fingers. "Everything tingles, but nothing hurts too badly. That is good, right?" "Very good. No frostbite, I think, though we will need to keep checking." He stood and moved to the small supply cabinet. "Are you hungry? I have some jerky, hardtack, and coffee. Nothing fancy, but it is warm." "Coffee sounds like heaven." Wesley busied himself with preparing the coffee, grateful for something practical to do. The single room felt suddenly much smaller with Natalie awake and aware. He was intensely conscious of her presence, of the intimacy forced upon them by circumstance. They had planned to meet in town, with her staying at the boarding house until the wedding. Now here they were, alone in a lined shack during a blizzard, and she was wearing nothing but her undergarments beneath those blankets. "How long will the storm last?" Natalie asked, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. "Hard to say. Could be a few hours, could be a few days. We have enough supplies to wait it out either way." He poured himself coffee and sat in the single chair, maintaining a respectful distance. I should check on my horse." He bundled back into his coat and stepped outside into the maelstrom. Duke had taken shelter on the lee side of the shack, standing with his back to the wind. Wesley checked him over, finding no signs of injury, then led him into the small lean-to attached to the shack. It was barely big enough for the horse, but it would keep Duke out of the worst of the weather. He rubbed the animal down as best he could, and made sure the water bucket was full of snow that would melt as the shack's warmth seeped through the walls. When Wesley came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, he found Natalie had wrapped one of the blankets around herself like a dress and was standing as close to the stove as safely possible. "I should help," she said. "I am not helpless, despite evidence to the contrary." "You nearly froze to death. You are allowed to rest." "I will go mad if I just sit here. Please, let me do something useful." Wesley recognized the determination in her voice because he heard it in his own often enough. "All right, can you cook?" "I can do many things, but cooking is not my strongest skill," she admitted. "My mother despaired of me in the kitchen, but I can follow instructions." "Good enough." He pulled out the sack of supplies. "We can make a decent stew with what I have here. There is dried beef, some carrots and potatoes, beans. Not fancy, but filling." They worked together in the small space, and Wesley found himself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Natalie moved with determination, if not grace, chopping vegetables with fierce concentration while he prepared the meat and got water heating on the stove. She asked questions about the ranch, about the territory, about his life, and he found himself answering more fully than he usually did. There was something about her direct manner that invited honesty. "I was surprised when you responded to my advertisement," Natalie admitted as she stirred the pot. "Your letters made you sound like an educated man. Most ranchers this far out do not have much use for books or learning." "My mother was a schoolteacher from Philadelphia. She made sure I could read and write properly. Said it did not matter if I was going to be a rancher. I needed to know how to think." Wesley smiled at the memory. "She made me read Shakespeare and the Greek philosophers alongside my ranch work." "I would have liked her. She would have liked you. She always said intelligence in a woman was more valuable than beauty, though she had both." The words came out before he could stop them, and he felt heat rise in his face. "I mean, she would have appreciated your education. Your letters showed real learning." Natalie glanced at him, and he could have sworn he saw amusement dancing in her eyes. "Thank you, I think. And yes, I did appreciate having access to my father's library. He was a lawyer, very passionate about learning. He encouraged me to read everything I could." "What made you decide to leave Boston? Your letters mentioned your brother, but you never really explained why you chose to come west." Her expression grew somber. "Thomas is a good man, but his wife never wanted me there. I do not blame her. She married him expecting to run her own household, not to have her spinster sister-in-law lingering about. I could have found work as a teacher or a governess, but the idea of being dependent on another family, always on the edges of other people's lives, felt suffocating." She met his eyes directly. "I wanted my own life, my own home. When I saw your advertisement, something about it felt right. You wrote about the land, about building something that would last. That appealed to me." "I was honest in my letters," Wesley said carefully. "The ranch is successful, but the work is hard. Winters are brutal, as you have now experienced firsthand. The nearest town is small. You would not have the society or culture you are used to. I know. And I am not afraid of hard work, despite my poor showing today. I want something real, Wesley. I want to matter. In Boston, I was just the Morrison girl who never married, the one people whispered about at church. Here, I could be something more." "You already are something more. You survived today. That takes real strength." She turned back to the stew, but not before he saw her expression soften. "Tell me about Red River. Your letters mentioned it, but what is it really like?" Wesley described the small settlement that served as the local hub, with its general store, saloon, church, and collection of homes. He told her about the other ranchers, about the challenges of the territory, about the beauty of the land when it was not trying to kill you. Natalie listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was already thinking about her new life. The stew was ready as darkness fell completely, though it was hard to tell through the blowing snow. They ate sitting on the bunk, the only furniture in the shack besides the single chair, keeping a careful distance between them. The food was simple but hot, and Natalie ate with an appetite that pleased Wesley. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her hands no longer shook. "This is not how I imagined our first meeting," Natalie said after they had finished eating and were nursing fresh cups of coffee. "In my mind, I would step off the stage looking presentable, we would have a polite conversation at the hotel, perhaps take a walk through town. Very proper and civilized. Would you have preferred that?" She considered the question seriously. "I think this is more honest, actually. We are seeing each other at our worst. If we can manage this, we can probably manage anything. That is a practical way of looking at it. I am a practical woman, despite the romantic notion of answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride." She smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "My friends in Boston thought I was insane. They could not understand why I would risk everything to marry a stranger. But I read your letters, Wesley, and I felt like I knew something essential about you. You were honest about the challenges, but also about the rewards. You did not try to paint a false picture. I wanted you to know what you were getting into. It would not be fair otherwise." "Exactly. That honesty made me trust you." She looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. "Was I right to trust you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Wesley met her eyes and answered with complete sincerity. "Yes. I give you my word, Natalie. I will never lie to you, and I will always do my best to keep you safe and provide for you. I cannot promise an easy life, but I can promise an honest one. That is all I ever wanted." The wind howled outside, shaking the shack's walls, but inside, a different kind of warmth was building. They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily now that the initial awkwardness had passed. Natalie told him about growing up in Boston, about her parents and her childhood, about the books she loved and the dreams she had harbored. Wesley spoke of his life on the ranch, of the satisfaction of building something with his own hands, of the harsh beauty of the Montana territory. Finally, exhaustion claimed them both. Wesley insisted Natalie take the bunk while he made himself as comfortable as possible on the floor near the stove with his coat as a blanket. She protested at first, but he was adamant. "You nearly died today. You get the bed. I have slept in worse places. At least take some of the blankets. You will freeze down there." They compromised, Wesley taking one thin blanket while Natalie kept the rest. He banked the fire to last through the night and settled onto the hard floor, listening to her breathing gradually slow and deepen as she fell asleep. Sleep did not come easily for Wesley. His mind kept replaying the moment he had found her collapsed in the snow, the terror he had felt that he might be too late. They had been strangers then, connected only by letters and a formal agreement. But something had shifted during the evening's conversation. The woman sleeping a few feet away was no longer just a convenient solution to his loneliness. She was Natalie, intelligent and brave and determined, and he found himself genuinely caring about her well-being beyond mere responsibility. The thought should have been frightening, but instead it felt right, like a key turning in a lock he had not known existed. Wesley woke to the sound of silence. The wind had stopped, and pale sunlight filtered through the gaps in the shutters. He sat up stiffly, his back protesting the night on the hard floor, and looked toward the bunk. Natalie was still asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked beneath her cheek. In the morning light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. He stood quietly and checked the stove, adding wood to coax the embers back to life. The fire caught quickly, and he put coffee on before moving to the door. The snow had piled nearly 3 feet high against the entrance, and it took considerable effort to push through. But when he finally managed it and stepped outside, the world was transformed. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a landscape of pristine white beneath a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The sun glittered off the snow like scattered diamonds, and the air was so cold and clear that every breath felt like swallowing ice. It was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Wesley checked on Duke, who seemed none the worse for the experience, then began the task of digging out the shack's entrance properly. The physical work felt good after a night of cramped stillness, and he attacked the snow with vigor. "You could have woken me to help." He turned to find Natalie standing in the doorway, still wrapped in her blanket but looking considerably more alert than yesterday. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her feet were bare on the cold floor. "Get back inside before you freeze those toes we worked so hard to save," Wesley ordered, though he smiled as he said it. "I am almost done here." She retreated, and by the time he came back in, she had poured them both coffee and was examining her clothes, which had dried overnight near the stove. "These are not going to be wearable," she said, holding up her dress. The fine wool had shrunk and warped from the soaking and freezing. Her boots were cracked beyond repair. "I do not suppose you keep spare women's clothing in your lined shack." "Unfortunately not. But I have an extra shirt and pants. They will be too big, but they are better than nothing. We need to get back to the ranch today while the weather holds." "How far is it?" "About 8 miles. We will have to ride double on Duke." "He can handle it for that distance, especially with how light you are." Natalie looked uncertain for the first time since waking. "I have never ridden a horse before." Wesley blinked. "Never. I am from Boston. We had carriages. Horses were what pulled them, not what one rode." She set down the ruined dress with a sigh. "I suppose this is just one more thing I need to learn. It is not hard, especially since you will be riding with me. You just need to hold on." He pulled his spare clothes from the supply cabinet. "These will be huge on you, but they are wool and will keep you warm. I will step outside while you change." The cold outside was brutal after the relative warmth of the shack, but Wesley gave her plenty of time to dress. When she finally called that she was ready, he came back in to find her swimming in his spare shirt, and with the pants rolled up multiple times at the ankles. She had used a piece of rope as a belt to keep them from falling off entirely. Despite the absurdity of the outfit, she managed to maintain her dignity. "How do I look?" she asked with a wry smile. "Like a scarecrow," he answered honestly, "but a warm scarecrow, that is what matters." He had wrapped strips of blanket around her feet in lieu of proper boots and secured them with more rope. It was a makeshift solution at best, but it would have to do. His own clothes had dried as well, and he dressed quickly, grateful for the familiar comfort of his own gear. They ate a quick breakfast of hardtack and the remains of the stew, then Wesley began saddling Duke. The horse stood patiently as Wesley worked, occasionally stomping and snorting clouds of breath into the frigid air. "Ready?" Wesley asked, leading Duke to where Natalie stood beside the shack. She looked at the horse with undisguised nervousness. "Do I have a choice?" "Not really, but I promise I will not let you fall." He mounted first, settling into the saddle, then held out his hand. "Give me your hand and put your foot on my boot. I will pull you up behind me." It took 2 tries and considerable awkwardness, but finally, Natalie was settled on Duke's rump, her arms wrapped around Wesley's waist. He could feel her tension in every line of her body. "Relax," he said gently. "Duke is steady and I've got you. Just move with the horse, do not fight it." "Easy for you to say," she muttered, but he felt her grip loosen slightly. The ride back to the ranch was slow going through the deep snow, but Duke plowed forward steadily. Wesley kept the pace easy, conscious of Natalie's inexperience and the horse's double burden. The sun was brilliant on the snow, forcing him to squint against the glare. Behind him, Natalie gradually relaxed, her body settling into the rhythm of the horse's movement. She even asked a few questions about the landmarks they passed, showing the same curiosity she had displayed the night before. Wesley found himself enjoying her presence behind him, the feel of her arms around his waist, the occasional comments she made about the landscape. They passed the place where he had found her collapsed against the fence post, though it was hard to tell exactly where it had been with all the fresh snow. Wesley did not point it out, but he felt Natalie's arms tighten briefly around him, and he knew she had recognized the area. "I was going to die there," she said quietly, "if you had not found me. But I did find you. That is what matters. Why did you come looking? You could have assumed the stage turned back or took shelter. You risked your life for someone you had never met." Wesley considered his answer carefully. "I read your letters, all of them, multiple times. I felt like I knew you at least a little, and I could not just sit safe in my house knowing you might be out there in the storm. It would not have been right. Most men would not have bothered." "Then I am glad I am not most men." She rested her cheek against his back briefly, a gesture so simple and trusting that it made Wesley's chest tighten. "So am I." The ranch came into view around noon, the main house and outbuildings looking picture perfect under their blanket of snow. Smoke rose from the chimney, which surprised Wesley until he remembered that his hired hand, a grizzled old cowboy named Pete, would have taken shelter there during the storm. Sure enough, as they approached, the door opened and Pete came out, his weathered face breaking into a relieved grin. "Boss." "Thank God, I was about to go looking for you." His eyes widened as he took in Natalie. "And you found her, Pete. This is Natalie Morrison. Natalie, Pete Harrison. He has worked for me for 5 years and keeps this place running when I am not here. Miss Morrison, welcome to Montana. Though I am sorry about the circumstances of your arrival." Pete moved to help her down from the horse, but Wesley had already dismounted and was reaching up for her himself. Natalie slid down into his arms, and for a moment they stood close together, her hands on his shoulders, his hands on her waist. Something passed between them, a recognition of everything they had survived together, before Wesley stepped back and turned to Pete. "We need to check on the cattle and see how bad the storm damage was. But first, Miss Morrison needs proper clothes and a warm bath if we can manage it. The big tub is in the kitchen. I will get water heating." Pete looked at Natalie's makeshift outfit and did not quite manage to hide his amusement. "We will find you something better to wear, miss. The boss's mother's things are still in the trunk in the spare room. I am sure he would not mind you using them until we can get you to town for proper clothes." Natalie looked at Wesley questioningly, and he nodded. "My mother was about your size. Please, use whatever you need. She would have liked you to have them." The house was larger than Natalie had expected from Wesley's modest descriptions in his letters. It was a proper ranch house, built from logs but well constructed, with glass windows and a solid shake roof. The main room held a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves lined with volumes. A kitchen opened off one side, and she could see doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. It was rustic by Boston standards, but felt warm and lived in. This could be a real home, she realized. her home, if she chose to go through with the marriage. Pete bustled about heating water while Wesley showed her to the spare room. It was simply furnished with a bed, dresser, and the trunk Pete had mentioned. Wesley opened it, revealing neatly folded clothes that still smelled faintly of lavender. "Take whatever you need," he said. "I will give you privacy. The bath will be ready soon." Natalie sorted through the trunk with gentle hands, conscious that these items had belonged to Wesley's mother, a woman who had been killed in a raid. The clothes were well made and practical, the wardrobe of a woman who had adapted to frontier life while maintaining her standards. She selected a simple dark blue dress, undergarments, stockings, and even found a pair of boots that were only slightly too large. The bath was heaven. Pete had set up the large tin tub near the kitchen stove, and the water was hot enough to make her sigh with pleasure as she sank into it. She washed away the grime and fear of the past 2 days, scrubbing her skin until it was pink and washing her hair twice. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, she felt like a different person. The dress fit reasonably well with only a few adjustments needed. Natalie braided her damp hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, then examined herself in the small mirror over the dresser. She looked like a frontier woman now, she thought. The fancy city girl who had stepped off the train in Billings was gone, replaced by someone who had survived a blizzard and an overturned stagecoach. She found Wesley and Pete in the main room, discussing the ranch work that needed to be done. Both men looked up when she entered, and Wesley's expression made something warm unfold in her chest. "Much better," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Human again, thank you." She looked between them. "What can I do to help? I meant what I said about not being helpless." Pete laughed. "I like her, boss. She has got spirit." Wesley smiled. "There is always work on a ranch, but maybe take today to rest and recover. Tomorrow will be soon enough to learn about your new life." But Natalie insisted on making herself useful, and soon found herself learning the basics of frontier cooking from Pete, who, despite his rough exterior, turned out to be an excellent cook. He showed her how to make proper biscuits, how to keep the stew from burning, how to manage the cantankerous stove. Wesley came in and out through the afternoon, dealing with ranch business but always checking on her, making sure she was all right. Each time their eyes met, Natalie felt that same spark of connection from the night before, growing stronger with each interaction. As evening approached, Pete announced he would be sleeping in the bunkhouse as usual. "I will leave you two to your privacy. You have got a lot to talk about, I imagine." He winked at Wesley and was gone before either of them could respond. Suddenly alone together in the house, the weight of their situation settled over them. They were supposed to be married by now, but instead they had spent the past day fighting for survival. They were strangers who had held each other for warmth, who had shared intimate conversations in a tiny line shack, who were connected by letters and a formal agreement, but not yet by any legal bond. Natalie took a deep breath and decided to address the situation directly. "We need to talk about what happens next." Wesley nodded, settling into one of the chairs by the fireplace and gesturing for her to take the other. "I know this is not how either of us planned for things to go. You came here expecting a proper courtship, time to adjust, a wedding in town with witnesses. Instead, you got a blizzard and a night in a line shack." "I got my life saved by a man who rode into a blizzard to find me," Natalie corrected. "That is not nothing, Wesley." "I did what anyone would have done." "No, you did what a good man would have done. There is a difference." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "I came here prepared to marry you based on your letters. These past 2 days have not changed that intention. If anything, they have made me more certain. I have seen you in crisis and you have seen me at my worst. We have survived something together. That matters. You do not want more time. You have barely seen the ranch, barely know me beyond one night of conversation. I know enough. I know you are brave and kind. I know you value honesty. I know you read Shakespeare and care about your mother's memory. I know you do what needs to be done, even when it is hard. She smiled slightly. Besides, what is the alternative? I cannot return to Boston. I have no money for passage even if I wanted to, which I do not. I came here to start a new life, and that has not changed. Wesley studied her face in the firelight. I want you to be sure. Marriage is permanent. Once we say those vows, I will not release you from them easily. I believe in keeping promises. So do I, which is why I am ready to make this promise, Wesley. She held out her hand. I came here to marry you. Let us do that. He took her hand, his rough fingers gentle around hers. The minister in Red River can perform the ceremony. We will need to wait until the roads are passable, maybe a week depending on the weather. That is fine. It will give me time to learn more about the ranch to make sure I am truly ready for this life. And if you decide you are not, then I will tell you honestly. But I do not think that will happen. She squeezed his hand. I am not a quitter, Wesley Fletcher. Once I make up my mind, I see things through. Over the following days, Natalie threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. She woke early with Wesley, helped Pete with the cooking, and bundled up to accompany Wesley on his daily rounds despite her continued awkwardness on horseback. The weather remained clear but bitterly cold, and every day brought new challenges. She learned to feed the chickens, to collect eggs, to churn butter. She learned which cattle were which, how to spot a sick animal, why certain fields were used for grazing and others left fallow. She learned to shoot, Wesley patiently teaching her how to handle his rifle despite her initial nervousness around firearms. You need to know how to protect yourself, he explained. I cannot always be here, and there are dangers beyond weather. Bears, wolves, sometimes worse. Worse meaning people, sometimes. Raiders, drifters. This is still rough country, Natalie. I need to know you can defend yourself in this house if necessary. She proved to be a decent shot after she got over her initial fear of the noise. Wesley praised her steady hand and good eye, and she felt a flush of pride at his approval. The evenings were her favorite time. After dinner, she and Wesley would sit by the fire and they would talk. He told her stories about building the ranch, about the territory's history, about his hopes for the future. She told him about books she had read, about her dreams of having her own garden, about the stars she had studied as a child with her father. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, each reading while the fire crackled. Natalie had been delighted to discover Wesley's extensive library and was working her way through volumes on Montana history and frontier life. Wesley often watched her while she read, though he looked away quickly whenever she glanced up. The attraction between them was growing impossible to ignore. Natalie found herself noticing the way his hands looked when he worked, strong and capable, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his voice when he talked to the horses, low and soothing. She caught herself thinking about the night in the line shack, when she had slept with his arms around her for warmth, and wondering what it would be like when they shared a bed as husband and wife. A week after the blizzard, Wesley announced that the road to Red River was finally passable. We can go into town tomorrow if you are ready. See the minister. Make this official. Natalie looked up from the biscuit dough she was kneading, flour dusting her hands and apron. In the past week, she had felt herself transforming from a Boston lady into something new, something that belonged to this place and this life. She was not the same woman who had stepped off the train in Billings. I am ready, she said simply. Wesley crossed the kitchen to stand beside her. He reached out and gently wiped a smudge of flour from her cheek, his touch lingering. "I know this is not a love match," he said quietly. "We barely know each other, and you came here out of necessity more than choice. But I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to make you happy. To be a good husband." Natalie set down the dough and turned to face him fully. "Wesley, look at me." When his eyes met hers, she continued, "This may have started as a practical arrangement, but it has become more than that, at least for me. I admire you, I respect you, I enjoy your company. Those are good foundations for a marriage. Love can grow from that. Can it?" He looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way she had not seen before. "I believe so. I think it already is." Wesley's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I think so too," he admitted. "From the moment I found you in that storm, something changed. You were not just the woman from the letters anymore. You were real and brave and stubborn, and I could not stop thinking about you." "I am stubborn, incredibly. You argued with me about sleeping on the floor, about helping with chores, about learning to shoot. You argue about everything. Is that a problem?" "No," he smiled. "I like it, I like you." Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I like you too, Wesley, very much." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and careful, a first kiss that held the promise of everything to come. Natalie's flower-covered hands came up to rest on his shoulders, and she kissed him back with growing confidence. When they finally parted, both of them were breathing harder. Wesley rested his forehead against hers. Was that all right? It was perfect. The ride into Red River the next morning was considerably more comfortable than Natalie's first horseback experience. She rode behind Wesley on Duke, her arms around his waist, her body relaxed against his back. The sun was brilliant on the snow, and the air was so cold it burned to breathe, but Natalie felt warm all through. Red River was a small settlement nestled along a bend in the Yellowstone River, just as Wesley had described. The main street held a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a small hotel, and a church with a white steeple that gleamed against the blue sky. Curious faces appeared in windows as they rode past, and several people called out greetings to Wesley. "News travels fast in a small town," Wesley said. "Everyone will know about you by evening. Let them know. I have nothing to hide." The minister, Reverend Thomas Sullivan, was a kindly man in his 50s who welcomed them warmly into the small church. His wife served as witness along with Pete, who had ridden in ahead of them. The ceremony was simple and quick, the traditional words taking on profound meaning in the quiet church. "Do you, Wesley Michael Fletcher, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Natalie Rose Morrison, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Natalie looked at Wesley, at his steady eyes and strong hands, at the man who had ridden into a blizzard to save her life. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." This kiss was different from the one in the kitchen. This was a kiss that sealed a promise that marked the beginning of their life together. When they parted, they were no longer two separate people but something new, a married couple, bound together by law and by choice. The Reverend's wife insisted on providing a small celebration, producing a cake she had baked that morning and coffee that was actually good. Several townspeople stopped by to offer congratulations, and Natalie found herself welcomed with genuine warmth. These were practical people who understood the realities of frontier life, and the story of her rescue from the blizzard had apparently already made the rounds. She was not just another mail-order bride but a survivor, one of their own now. They spent the afternoon in town, Wesley introducing her to the shopkeepers and prominent citizens. At the general store, he insisted on buying her proper cold weather gear. A good coat, sturdy boots, warm gloves, and several yards of fabric for making new dresses. You do not have to do all this, Natalie protested. Your mother's clothes are fine. You are my wife now. I can provide for you properly. He lowered his voice. And I want you to have things that are yours, not hand-me-downs from a woman you never met. The general store owner, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Patterson, helped Natalie select what she would need. You will want wool for everyday wear, she advised. And this flannel is good for nightgowns. Gets cold here in winter, you need to stay warm. Natalie felt her cheeks heat at the mention of nightgowns, very aware that tonight would be her first night sharing a bed with Wesley as his wife. Mrs. Patterson noticed her blush and smiled kindly. You will be fine, dear. Mr. Fletcher is a good man, one of the best in the territory. They rode home in the late afternoon, the packages tied behind the saddle. Natalie was quiet, her mind spinning with the reality of what had just happened. She was married. She was Wesley Fletcher's wife. Tonight she would share his bed, and tomorrow she would wake up as the mistress of this ranch, responsible for this household. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Wesley seemed to sense her nervousness because he kept up a steady stream of conversation about neutral topics: the ranch, the neighbors, his plans for spring. By the time they reached home, some of Natalie's tension had eased. Pete had already left for the bunkhouse, leaving a note that he had prepared dinner and would see them in the morning. The house was warm and welcoming, the fire burning steadily, a pot of stew simmering on the stove. They ate dinner together at the table, and Natalie was grateful for the familiar routine. But when the meal was finished and the dishes washed, they could no longer avoid acknowledging what came next. Wesley cleared his throat. I moved my things into the master bedroom. It is the largest room with a proper bed, but if you would prefer to wait, if you need more time, I can sleep in the spare room. There is no rush. Natalie appreciated his consideration, but she had made her decision. Wesley, we are married. I did not agree to this marriage with the intention of maintaining separate rooms. I want a real marriage with everything that entails. Are you sure? She stood and crossed to where he sat, then held out her hand. I am sure. Wesley took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, and then he leaned down and kissed her, deeper than before, with growing passion. Natalie kissed him back, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally made their way to the bedroom, Natalie was nervous but determined. Wesley was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable. There was some awkwardness, as was natural for a first time, but there was also genuine connection and growing pleasure. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Natalie's head resting on Wesley's chest, his arm around her shoulders. The intimacy of the moment felt natural, right, as if they had been doing this for years rather than hours. Are you all right? Wesley asked softly. I am perfect. She traced idle patterns on his chest. Were you disappointed? Disappointed. Natalie, that was wonderful. You are wonderful. He kissed the top of her head. I was afraid you might regret this, marrying a rough rancher instead of finding some proper Boston gentleman. I do not want a proper Boston gentleman, I want you. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. This feels right, Wesley, us, this life. I know it has only been a short time, but I cannot imagine being anywhere else. Good, because I have no intention of ever letting you go. He pulled her back down against him. When I found you in that blizzard, I thought I was just saving a stranger's life. I did not know I was finding my future. You believe in fate. I never used to. But now I am starting to think maybe some things are meant to be. You were supposed to be on that stage. The storm was supposed to hit. I was supposed to find you. All of it led us here. I like that idea. Natalie yawned, suddenly exhausted. The day had been long and emotional, and the warmth of the bed and Wesley's presence were making her drowsy. "Sleep," Wesley murmured. "Tomorrow we start our real life together." Natalie smiled and closed her eyes, feeling safer and more content than she had in years. She had come west looking for a new beginning, and she had found so much more than she had hoped for. She had found a home, a purpose, and a partner. She had found love, growing slowly but surely between them, rooted in respect and nurtured by shared experience. Outside, the Montana wind howled across the prairie, but inside the ranch house, two people slept peacefully, beginning their journey together. The winter passed in a blur of work and learning. Natalie threw herself into mastering the skills she would need as a rancher's wife. She learned to preserve food, to make soap, to sew and mend clothes. She became proficient with the rifle, though she hoped never to need that particular skill. She learned to ride properly, progressing from terrified passenger to confident horsewoman under Wesley's patient instruction. More importantly, she learned Wesley. She learned that he was quiet in the mornings until he had his first cup of coffee, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise, that he was scrupulously fair in his business dealings but could be ruthless when protecting what was his, that he loved this land with a passion that went beyond mere ownership, seeing himself as a steward of something greater, and Wesley learned her. He learned that she was fiercely independent and hated being coddled, that she had a sharp tongue when provoked, but was also capable of great kindness, that she could be stubborn to the point of foolishness, but also pragmatic when necessary, that she had nightmares sometimes about freezing in the snow, and the only thing that helped was holding her until she calmed. Their relationship deepened from attraction and mutual respect into genuine love. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way Wesley would brush snow from her hair before she came inside. The way Natalie would have hot coffee ready when he came in from early morning chores. The conversations that stretched late into the night, covering everything from philosophy to ranch management. The laughter that came more easily as they grew comfortable with each other. Spring arrived suddenly, as it did in Montana, the snow melting in great rushing torrents that swelled the rivers and turned the prairie green almost overnight. The ranch work intensified, with calving season and the first drive to summer pastures. Natalie worked alongside Wesley and Pete, learning by doing, earning calluses and sore muscles and a deep sense of accomplishment. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Natalie turned to Wesley with a nervous smile. "I have news," she said. Something in her tone made Wesley set down his coffee and give her his full attention. "What kind of news? The good kind, I hope." She took a deep breath. "I am pregnant. I am fairly certain, based on timing and symptoms. A baby should arrive sometime in the fall." Wesley's expression went through several changes in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, wonder, and finally pure joy. "A baby, we are going to have a baby." "Yes. Are you happy?" Instead of answering, Wesley pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. When he finally released her, both of them were breathless. "I am thrilled," he said. "Terrified but thrilled. A baby, our baby." "I am scared," Natalie admitted. "I know almost nothing about babies. What if I am a terrible mother? You will be a wonderful mother. You are brave and smart and strong. Our child will be lucky to have you." He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby! I can hardly believe it." Over the summer, as Natalie's pregnancy became more obvious, Wesley became almost comically protective. He tried to prevent her from doing any heavy work, which led to their first real argument as a married couple. "I am pregnant, not an invalid." Natalie snapped after Wesley tried to stop her from carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their work. I just want to keep you safe, both of you safe. And I appreciate that. But Wesley, I will go mad if you treat me like I might break. I need to feel useful. Let me do what I can, and I promise I will tell you if it becomes too much. They compromised, as they had learned to do over the months of their marriage. Natalie continued her regular work, but accepted help with the heavier tasks. Wesley relaxed his vigilance but insisted on accompanying her whenever she rode, just in case. The baby came in October, during the first cold snap of autumn. The birth was hard and long, attended by the doctor from Red River and several neighboring women who had come to help. Wesley paced outside the bedroom for hours, driven nearly mad by the sounds of Natalie's pain and his inability to help her. Finally, just before dawn, a baby's cry split the air. Wesley was through the door before anyone could stop him, finding Natalie pale and exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "We have a son," she said, her voice hoarse but triumphant. "A healthy baby boy." Wesley approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the tiny face peeking from the blankets. His son. His and Natalie's. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was red-faced from crying, but Wesley thought he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "What should we name him?" he asked, carefully touching one tiny fist. "I was thinking Thomas after my brother, but only if you approve. Thomas Fletcher, I like it." Wesley leaned down to kiss Natalie's forehead. "You were so brave, I am in awe of you. I am just glad it is over." That was considerably more difficult than the blizzard. Wesley laughed, and the baby quieted at the sound, his dark eyes trying to focus on his father's face. "Welcome to Montana, Thomas. You have quite a mother. She survived a blizzard to get here." Over the following months, they settled into their new life as parents. Thomas was a healthy baby with strong lungs and a tendency to wake at inconvenient hours. Wesley discovered a patience he had not known he possessed, walking the floor at midnight with his crying son, singing old songs his mother had taught him until Thomas quieted. Natalie navigated motherhood with the same determination she had brought to learning ranch life. She made mistakes and learned from them, asked advice from the neighboring women, and gradually gained confidence. Watching her with their son, Wesley felt his love for her deepen even further. She was not just his wife but the mother of his child, his partner in building something that would last beyond their own lives. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of a growing family. Thomas was joined by a daughter 2 years later, whom they named Elizabeth after Wesley's mother. Then came another son, James, and finally another daughter, Sarah. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children playing, arguing, learning. Natalie became the heart of not just their home but the entire community. She started a small school in Red River, teaching the children of neighboring ranches during the winter months. She organized church socials and helped establish a lending library. She wrote regular letters to her brother in Boston, maintaining that connection to her past while building her future in Montana. Wesley expanded the ranch, buying adjoining property and building the herd until the Fletcher Ranch was one of the most successful in the territory. But his greatest pride was not in the land or the cattle, but in the family he and Natalie had built together. 20 years after Natalie first stepped off that train in Billings, she stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset with Wesley beside her. Their children were grown now. Thomas was preparing to take over the ranch, having recently married a sweet girl from Red River. Elizabeth was teaching school in Billings. James was working as a deputy in town, and Sarah was still at home, though she had recently caught the eye of the blacksmith's son. "You ever regret it?" Wesley asked, taking Natalie's hand. "Leaving Boston. Answering that advertisement." Natalie looked at him, at the silver threading through his dark hair, at the lines the sun had carved around his eyes, at the face that had become more dear to her than her own. "Not for a single moment. That blizzard led me to exactly where I was meant to be. I used to think I saved your life that day in the snow, but really, you saved mine. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You made this place a home. You made my life have meaning beyond work." "We saved each other," Natalie said simply. "That is what love does." Wesley pulled her close, and they stood together in the gathering dusk, watching the stars emerge one by one over the Montana prairie. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing, the sound of family and love and home. It had started with a blizzard, a desperate search through the snow, and a stranger's hand reaching out to pull her to safety. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined that cold night in the line shack. A love that had weathered every storm, built a family, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Natalie had come west as a mail-order bride, a practical solution to a practical problem. She had found a love story instead, one written not in grand gestures but in small daily choices, in shared work and shared dreams, in the decision to keep choosing each other every single day. As they turned to go inside, Wesley paused and looked back at the land stretching out around them, snow-capped mountains visible in the distance. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For getting lost in that blizzard. For being stubborn enough to survive. For taking a chance on a lonely rancher in this rough life. For everything." Natalie smiled and took his hand. "Thank you for following my tracks, for bringing me to warmth, for giving me a home and a family and a love I never knew I was looking for." They walked inside together, closing the door on the Montana night, secure in the knowledge that whatever storms might come, they would face them together, just as they had faced that first blizzard so many years ago. The mail-order bride and the cowboy who saved her had become something more. Partners, lovers, friends, parents, and above all, each other's home in a wild and beautiful land. The fire crackled in the hearth, and outside the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying stories of courage and love, of survival and hope, of two souls who had found each other in the midst of a storm and built a life together that was warmer and brighter than any fire could ever be.